You're juggling it all: work, family, decisions, expectations, 6 hats, maybe more every single day. But behind the scenes, your body is running on stress, and stress left unchecked will lead to illness. I'm Dr. Shami, an integrated family doctor, and this is 6 Hats, the podcast that helps you understand what stress is doing to your body and what you can do about it now. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the 6 Hats podcast. And today we're talking about something I see more and more in clinic, and patients who feel unwell, exhausted, inflamed, and no one can quite explain why. So what if the answer isn't just in the body, but in the home? So today I'm joined by Nicole Bijlsma, Australia's leading expert in building biology and environmental health. And she specializes in identifying hidden environmental factors like mold and indoor air quality issues and toxins. So we're diving into what mold actually is, how it impacts health, and most importantly, what you can do about it. So welcome, Nicole.
Thank you for having me on, talking about an interesting topic that's a passion of mine for too many years that I can possibly explain.
That is amazing. And so, do you know what a great place to start, Nicole, is what exactly is mold and why does it grow in homes?
Well, mold is a type of fungus. There's different types, mushrooms that you eat, of course, yeasts that are used in food industry, and of course, we have a small amount in our gut microbiome. But the mold we're talking about in water-damaged buildings is what we call filamentous fungi, which means it grows hyphae and branch-like filaments that quickly spread throughout the environment to essentially decompose your house. So you're in the way, it wants to decompose. It's nature's greatest decomposers. So it's a very specific type of fungi that's very unique to water-damaged buildings. Doesn't matter whether you're in Europe, Tasmania, Russia, we're generally finding the same type of molds in water-damaged buildings.
And it's really interesting. By the way, I did your course and I think it's absolutely fantastic. So anyone who's interested, definitely go to your website. And what I actually learned is there's mold pretty much everywhere, but it's the moisture that it's required for it to grow. Is that right, Nicole?
Exactly. So a healthy home is a dry home. When you start getting moisture, now moisture comes in two forms. It can be water vapor or it can be liquid water. Now, most insurance-related issues relate to an escape of liquid or a recent water event that results in microbial growth. But the reality is a lot of mold problems we see in the field can also be due to high levels of water vapor. That could be due to just living in a humid climate. So if you live in Sydney, Central Coast, Queensland, there's going to be mold pretty much wherever there's dirt and dust. Like the mold is growing in that because the humidity is high enough, in excess of 70% or more, to support that microbial growth. So it really is understanding how to keep a house dry, and simple things like, bathing, breathing, washing, cooking, all of those generate water vapor in the house. And if you don't have good exhaust ventilation or you don't clean your filters, your exhaust fan grills, then you're going to compromise and increase the load of water vapor in the house. If you are living in a relatively new build that's really tight, that has inadequate passive ventilation, then you don't have a lot of margin when it comes to elevating that water vapor level. So you want to make sure that exhaust fan in the bathroom is vented not just to the roof, but to the atmosphere. You want to make sure you don't have 2 people in a small bedroom because they're breathing out water vapor. And of course, if it hits a cold surface, then it's going to greater chance of, causing condensation. So it can be due to different things: roof leaks, drainage problems, not maintaining the building envelope, which is the roof, the hat, the walls, and the foundation is critical. And unfortunately, homes are money boxes because eventually those tiles need to be resealed and recapped, every 15, 20 years or so, or eventually replaced, which is a lot of money. Plus drainage issues. Like if you choose to live on a hill, in a hill at the bottom of a hill, you want to make sure you're spending the money to properly divert that water away from the crawl space and from the foundation. So once you get, rising damp problems, this can be very costly, not just financially, but also to your health.
So true. And what I'm hearing from all my patients when it comes to their stories and how we end up talking about mold, this can happen even years before they present or even months. And it's so interesting because when they reflect back, they go, oh, yeah, there was a water leak. We thought we fixed it, but apparently it hasn't been fixed properly. So this can stem from many years in the past. Is that right?
From our experience, when there's elevated fungal particulate in these samples, it's generally the average is 3 months by the time they show symptoms. And the problem is the worst times I cannot see or smell mold. So if you can't see, you can't smell it, but you've had a history of a roof leak, plumbing issue, water event, drainage problem, then, have a look at the time frame. But 3 months tends to be the average of exposure. So where their system becomes overwhelmed from the fungal particulate that they're breathing in. For children, most of the fungal particulate falls to the floor. So your vacuum cleaner becomes utterly critical. If you have a shitty vacuum cleaner with a tiny little HEPA filter or no HEPA filter, you're essentially lifting it into the system and then making it airborne, which takes hours to drop. So to me, the big ones when it comes to water damage times is obviously get to the source of moisture. If you don't fix that, no amount of clove oil, which we don't recommend anyway, or chemicals is going to kill it. You have to get to the source of moisture first. It's your very first priority, whether it's high levels of water vapor and or liquid water, you need to get to that so that, bathroom leak, waterproof membrane that's been compromised, that becomes really important because within 48 hours of liquid water being present, you're going to get microbial growth. So it actually happens quite quickly.
And I remember you were saying about rental properties and how they steam clean carpets. Is that another area that we need to be concerned about?
Yeah, so the rental occupant needs to keep the carpets in good condition, obviously, as part of their tenancy regulation laws, which may involve steam cleaning or looking after the carpet, obviously. If they choose to steam clean and it doesn't dry in a timely manner, I'm talking about hours, you're going to start getting microbial growth. So I've seen quite a number of homes where you couldn't see or smell mold, couldn't see it on the carpet, but there's a history of regular steam cleaning, especially in cooler months where it's not going to dry in a timely manner. And the air samples are horrific. Like you can't see or smell mold, but there's high levels of mold in the air, which you can quantify with sampling. And these people are really sick. So to me, wet carpets is one of the biggest risk factors for adverse health effects, especially for, if you're getting recurrent colds and flus. Everyone gets colds and flus, but if you're getting them that they're persisting for weeks or months and they keep coming back and not responsive to treatment, that's when I start thinking, is this actually mold? And it can also happen in the car. Like I've seen many water damaged cars that have water issues and air conditioners that are loaded with microbial growth, that they're sick with, and they get sick within 3 months of having a secondhand car that's loaded with mold. Schools, with the kids' symptoms, I'm looking at, is everyone sick in the house or is it only one person? If so, is it that there's an issue in their rooms that they're spending time in? What is the timing that they started school? Things like that are really important because often, but I do find occasionally, like you've got, a recent one with a mother and two children, and two of them are fine. The mother and daughter is fine, and the other daughter is really sick with mold-related symptoms. And lo and behold, within 3 months of starting a new year at school, she's in a water damage portable. So you can start fine-tuning in the history where the root cause is likely to be. Is it a car? Is it at workplace? Is it at school? Is it a home environment? Who's sick? How many people are sick? Is there a susceptibility because that room is more elevating mold because that's where the water issues are? Do they have a genetic predisposition that makes them uniquely susceptible to fatiguing syndrome? All of these questions become very, very important. And I think actually the exposure history is the most powerful clinical tool we have to identify root cause because the timing is just always so predictable when you start looking at the history.
I loved how you dived into symptoms. So that's where I want to sort of go to now. If we had to summarize, what would you say the key symptoms are? You mentioned about those chronic infections, often see chronic sinusitis. You also mentioned chronic fatigue. Any other symptoms that we really should be considering when it comes to
The
mold?
ones that I always think, okay, I've got to check if mold is an issue is definitely upper and lower respiratory tract infections that are persistent and don't respond to treatment. They're the big ones. So your itises, your chronic sinusitis. I'm always amazed by the time people come to me and they've had chronic sinusitis for years, that they've been to doctors, they've been to respiratory physicians, and no one even asked them about mold, which is so obvious to me, because they're breathing in the problem, right? So, and it is 95% of the time, contributing in these cases, if not causing it in those cases for sure. So your sinusitis, you've got tonsillitis, pharyngitis, bronchitis, all of those are not unusual. Not that they're all caused by mold, but if they're persistent, recurrent, then that gives me good grounds to go, okay, is there something in their environment that's in mold that they're exposed to, that they're reacting to? Of course, the other ones are asthma and allergies. A good example was last week I was doing an assessment, and she's got all these symptoms: fatigue, brain fog. She's got mainly persistent respiratory tract infections and doesn't feel well, like flu-like symptoms. And when I assessed her house, there's a bit of water damage, etc. But what I noticed is that there is a cat there, and I've asked, is she allergic to the cat? And she hasn't had allergy testing. But when I looked in the return air vent where the ducted heating goes through, it's completely chock-a-block with dust from all the previous occupants, because they've only moved in a year ago. And I see dog hair there. Now, she doesn't have a dog. So does she have an allergy to dogs? I don't know. She needs to go and get tested. But it seems that, she's been sick since moving there. Her husband is fine, but there's a lot of pet allergens in the dust in the return air vent and in the flexible dust. So I suspect this is an allergy, not a mold exposure, because the levels in her air samples were not remarkable. So severe allergies can be very similar to what we're finding in water damaged buildings, with the persistent respiratory related issues and flu-like symptoms. So I think allergies is grossly underdiagnosed in Australia. I know we already have one of the highest levels of allergies in the world, but the reality is a lot of people don't know they've got allergies. So when I see these symptoms, I say to them, go and get allergy tested for dust mite, pet dander. Mold is useless actually for allergy testing because they're not using a lot of the antigens typical in water damaged buildings. But for other things like dust mite and pet dander, I find it really helpful. And I've found about 10% of the cases where they think it's mold's actually allergies to their pets often, or the dander that's in the dust in their house. And in this case, there was no filter in front of the return air vent, which is the vent you normally see in the hallway where all the air goes straight back into the system and gets recirculated. It's so much more common than we realise. So for me, with these symptoms, first, it's like a process of elimination. Do you have allergies? I need to know that, because what I'm going to recommend in your house is going to be different to what I'd recommend if it was water damage.
And we must mention about weight and how that's quick weight increase. Or what I normally find is, they've tried everything, low carb diets, exercising, but they're just still not losing weight. And it's the weight gain of like 10 kilos in a year. How is that related to mold?
Yeah, it can be. So depending on their genes and how the immune responds to, the mold, it's the way they're responding to the mold that causes a lot of the problems. So essentially, according to Richie Shoemaker's research, 25% of the population have a unique genetic signatures on the immune response gene, chromosome 6, which means that their system doesn't recognize these mold antigens. So it ends up causing this inflammation that's ongoing. A lot of these antigens or proteins in the cell wall of the fungi combine on toll-like receptors and leptin receptors, which are involved also in hormones and weight. So they can put on high levels, quite a lot of weight in a very short period of time. And the key that makes you think this is the issue is, they haven't changed their diet, they haven't undergone any significant stress to justify that weight gain. They're doing everything they've normally done, and suddenly the weight starts to go up. You know what I mean? So you do have to exclude other variables like thyroid problems and postmenopause, etc. But yeah, it definitely can cause weight-related issues. And in some ways, it could be the body's capacity to try and protect it by shunting the toxins into the fat in order to prevent it being accessed by the vital organs. We certainly see this with chemical exposures, and each generation being born more and more overweight, infant obesity, obesogens, they're calling it, because of all the phthalates and chemicals in everyday products and plastics. That the kids are being born bigger, larger fat cells, more fat cells, because they're exposed to these in utero. And it's a way of the body protecting and shunting those toxins into the lipid tissues to prevent them being exposed to the vital organs. So it's interesting what the body's trying to do to address this. But yes, weight gain is a problem. A lot of these women, especially, will have thyroid-related problems, often hypothyroidism, which can be related in, obviously can be due to many different things, including chemicals, but if it's mold related, they'll often have other symptoms to indicate that that's an issue. They're often showing no changes in their TSH, T3, T4, but reverse T3 tends to be different, and it's not being checked by a general practitioner. They're not on standard pathology tests. So yes, thyroid problems that are very common in women with this particular genetic signature if they are in water damage buildings, no doubt about that.
Amazing. So now I want to go moving on to what you're specialize in, Nicole, and it's building biology. And I'm so curious, not many people know what a building biologist is. Walk me through what you would do when you come into a house and they've asked you to come and assess for mold.
Well, first thing I do is a history. It's the gold. So the history, I look at what month of what year did things start going pear-shaped for your health. Tell me about your health. When did things, what makes it worse, what makes it better? And in the case I was just telling you about, in the history, she said, I'm worse, always worse when the heater is on. I'm going, well, that's not mold. That's not mold. That's allergens in the dust. So that is really, and then of course, when I went to the house to gather the evidence and the data, that became apparent that it's likely to be an undiagnosed allergen to, either dust mite or pet dander, etc. So the history is very, very important. I normally do that on Zoom, and I like to do it with the client using their phone so they can show me different parts of the house. I can get an idea of risk when I go in there, how much is the mold, if they can see it, what the house looks like, what degree of clutter, etc. is there. Other issues like where the smart meter or routers are, to get an idea of ventilation, lighting, all that sort of stuff. I can get a lot on going through a history while they're on their phone and showing me, where the drainage issues are, what the exhaust fans are doing. There's a lot you can pick up on that. And then I'll go to the house and grab my tools, which is quite a lot, to be able to measure what's going on. So based on the history, like, for example, if it's tinnitus, heart-related issues, chest tightness, headaches, fatigue, brain fog, and sleep disturbances, I'm thinking electromagnetic fields, especially with the ringing in the ears, tends to be more related to that. But brain fog and fatigue are common in all the environmental sensitivities, whether it's chemical sensitivity, electrical sensitivity, or mold biotoxin-related illness. It's brain fog and fatigue are the first top two symptoms. With EMFs, I'm getting more tinnitus, so ringing in the ears, but also headaches, although that can still be present in mold as well, no doubt about it. And the reality is most people are living in very high levels of electromagnetic fields from a building biology perspective, which is causing a lot of the stress to be to cause a lot of oxidative stress within the cell, because it's like this electromagnetic fields is warning the body, it's triggering, the voltage gated calcium channels on the cell membrane to increase calcium influx. So it's stressing the body. And if I was to simplify what that means in layman's terms, it's almost like when you have Wi-Fi on in the house, especially while you sleep, it's tricking the body into thinking it's daytime instead of nighttime. So if you affect sleep, you don't have health. Sleep is the hallmark of health. And there's no doubt we're in a absolute pandemic of insomnia across Western countries, and especially teenagers and children who've got, all these Wi-Fi enabled devices in their bedrooms, etc. And that's why I end up doing my randomized controlled trial on the impact of Wi-Fi and sleep, which was statistically significant after 7 nights with a baby monitor on your bedside table, which is very disturbing and very common in what I'm seeing on a daily basis.
So glad you mentioned EMF. I know we're diverting, but just want to put it out there. We are literally glued to phones. Every building we enter has got EMF. And when you don't turn it off at night and you've got your phone right next to your bed, you literally don't give your body a break at all. So I get what you're saying, Nicole. It's quite scary how much stress you're putting the body under.
Absolutely. And look, the Russians are probably at the forefront of this research. They have one of the strictest protocols and been warning for decades. I mean, they use microwave technology in military, right? Because it's so effective. So, yeah, there's been a very long history of adverse health effects associated with electromagnetic fields, especially the US naval industry, Russia's research. The thing is, there's long latency periods. So, like asbestos, which has a long latency period, so do exposures to radio frequencies long term. And the exposure standards are not health-based standards. They're there with compromise with industry. So it is definitely a problem. And I think it's the perfect storm. You add high, low levels of radio frequencies in Wi-Fi enabled devices throughout your house. You then build a house that's designed to fail in terms of being so tight like a plastic bag, it ends up with condensation and mold that you can't even see, but you're inhaling. And then you start increasing chemicals in your food, which has been going on for many decades, in our water and our air. And now we're wondering why we're sick. We're living longer, great, but we're a lot sicker. And now we think Parkinson's and dementia is part of old age. It isn't. Didn't exist in the 50s and 60s. There were 2 research papers on Parkinson's in the 60s, 2. Now they're filling journals. Now it's unbelievable what's happening, and it's toxicity. There's no doubt about that in my mind.
Amazing. Nicole, can you go back to the testing for mold that you would do when you visit a house?
Yes, of course. I get a bit excited.
I do, Nicole.
So when should you test? The bad news is you don't have to see or smell more for it to be a problem. So unless you've got data, sampling data, we're flying blind. And for me, that's why the exposure history is important. When did you get sick? Is it respiratory? Do you have chronic fatigue-like symptoms since moving into the house? Are you better away from the house? These are important questions. In terms of testing, is often warranted because unless you test, you don't know. I would strongly suggest people put the money into the testing rather than getting someone to fog or remediate. Fogging is actually against the Australian standard. It's not recommended for mold because unless you physically remove the fungal particulate, you can still breathe in. Breathing in dead mold still makes you sick, essentially. So it's irrelevant whether you kill it or not. And I think that's important for people to be aware of that. But essentially testing, the reason I say this is because the restoration industry, unfortunately, a lot of the time, it's like going to a doctor, an oncologist, and saying, hey, doc, sure, I've got a brain tumor. Don't test me. Just give me the chemo. No one in their right mind, no oncologist would go, okay, yeah, sure, here's the chemotherapy prescription. No, you have to quantify what's going on. What people do is because they go, oh, the testing's too expensive, so we'll just get the remediator in who's flying blind because there's no data. And now you're getting a bathroom renovation that you often don't need because that's not where the problem is. So to me, it's really important to put the money into the testing. If you've done everything you could, you've gone from one doctor to the other, no one knows what's going on, but it coincides after a water event or after moving into this house or after a renovation, and you've got the symptoms that we would typically see with mold, then I say put the money in the testing. And that protects you too, because then it really creates a scope of works that's very specific for the remediator to follow, as opposed to going beyond that and then charging you for a roof renovation you don't need, and then we've got something to be able to context to test after the job to confirm that it's been done correctly. Because what I've seen many common times is if the remediator is testing their own work, they literally just have to get a microfiber cloth to wipe a surface and then do a biotape and there's nothing on it. Or keep the air scrubber on the air purifier while they're doing an air sample and they're not going to have anything on it. And when they ask me for my professional opinion, I look at the report and I go, the air scrubber was on. I know, because it's not normal in a healthy home to have no spores on a tape lift. To have no spores on an air sample is not a healthy home unless the air purifier was on. So unfortunately, you need an independent third party to assess that to protect the consumer. So by putting the money into the testing, at least we have data to go with to establish hopefully where the source of moisture is, the level of spread or cross-contamination, and if remediation is required, what does that look like?
Fantastic. So if we can just, before we sort of wrap up, I'd love to know what we can do to prevent. What can we do, for example, like what you said, 40 hours, there is going to be mold. And so it's just being really vigilant. But what methods can we take?
Right. So maintenance is going to be a big one, as I mentioned, really looking at during a heavy rain event, how does your house cope in heavy rain? Where does the water pool? Are there gutters that are failing, down pipes? What's going on with the drainage? Get out there during a heavy rain event and see what your house is doing. Getting a roofing contractor every year to check that your roof is in good condition, that the flashing's in good condition, that the stormwater system is working, is money well spent. Cleaning the gutters, gutter guard, etc. It's not helpful because the sediment builds up and then can also impact, how quickly that water is moved away from the building envelope. So, maintenance is very, very important. I would also recommend people to get water leak detectors, so you can just get them, put them under your sinks, and if there's a water event, it alerts you with quite a loud sound to alert you if your flexible water hose has actually split, which is the number one cause of water events, according to insurance claims. So having leak detectors, very important. I think they're about $20, $30 each. It's cheap for insurance, under every sink is helpful. In terms of getting a prevention is cleaning your exhaust grills in your bathrooms, every month, because if they're dirty, they're not pulling moisture out. That's important. Your range hood, where all the fat is, you have to be cleaning it monthly because it's not effective at pulling water vapor out of the house if it's dirty. Also getting a plumber to check if it's vented to atmosphere, not the roof cavity. So making sure you've got good water vapor management. Maybe, with the kids trying to train them to have shorter showers or cold showers to less water vapor. Good luck with that. I've got 3 kids. There's no hoping that that's ever going to happen. But, things like that are very important. And if you have a water event, that you just dry it as quickly as you possibly can and have a heater, a dehumidifier, and a fan. So having those 3 things in a house so that you don't have to wait for the insurance to get their act into gear, which could take days or weeks. You need to be able to dry that in a timely manner. So definitely everyone should have a dehumidifier, especially if they have bathrooms where there's a lot of condensation, or even bedrooms that have condensation. A dehumidifier is a great way to pull the moisture out to prevent condensation and prevent mold. So that's a really useful thing to have, but also works really well if there's a water event that they can quickly dry in the quickest possible time.
Amazing. Wow. That was so informative, Nicole. I'm sure it's going to benefit so many of my listeners. So thank you so much for your time. And before we let you go, where can people find you, learn more about what you do?
Sure. So my website, buildingbiology.com.au. In May, I'll have a free survey, Is Your House Making You Sick? And my 4th edition of my book hopefully will be coming out in spring this year. So that can be very helpful. A bit scary. Some people say for nighttime reading, but definitely helps consumers understand how easy it is to create a healthy home.
Amazing. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Shami.
Thanks for listening to 6 Hats, where it's all about progress, not perfection. If this episode spoke to you, don't wait, hit follow now, leave a quick review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Want to take your next step today? Download my ebook. The link is waiting in the show notes. And remember, this is general advice only. Always speak to your practitioner for anything medical. See you next time.